30 seconds and counting. 25 seconds and counting. We are still go. 20 seconds. Guidance alert. The guidance system now going internal. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening to my viewers in Europe and Africa. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the Western Hemisphere, and good very early morning to my viewers in the Pacific Rim. And welcome to the Angry Astronaut. Thanks very much for joining me here today. We're going to be talking about the current state of Starship, something we talk about this channel fairly frequently, depending on where we are, heading up to another orbital flight test, but we are indeed getting up to that point. Where's everybody checking in this time? Looks like we have folks from a wide variety of places, as again, North Carolina, Nova Scotia. Hello, Birmingham. Thanks very much for checking in today. Hello, Surrey. Really do appreciate that. Icelandic volcano eruption decreases. Thank God. Everybody keep Iceland in your thoughts and prayers, because this volcano is erupting in very close to the most densely populated area of Iceland. Vast majority of the population lives within 20, 30 kilometers of that eruption. Hello, Florida, Hamburg, Texas, Indianapolis, Australia. We have Ireland County, Kildare. Thank you very much for checking in today. Greenwood, Indiana, Ohio, Minnesota, Berlin, Houston, Texas, Newcastle upon Tyne, and the kitchen, back to the living room. Hello, Dorset. Thank you very much for checking in Florida's Space Coast and the Czech Republic. Thanks very much for checking in today. Checking in. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. But Prague is someplace that I would really love to come visit someday. I'd really hope I get an opportunity to do that at some point. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, from what I understand, and I still have never been to Prague, so I'm really hoping that that changes at some point. Londonderry, New Hampshire, and Belgium, Clifton and New Orleans. Hello, New Jersey and Germany. There's a geologist who's on the front lines in Reykjavik. Well, I really hope they're safe. So hopefully things are okay. Starship USS Enterprise, Pennsylvania, München, depending on whether or not you're saying it in Hochdeutsch. People in Munich would say München. Anyway, Uruguay, hello. And yes, indeed, we will keep her in our prayers, Hans, because obviously being there, right there, is a dangerous place to be indeed. Very violent earthquakes. I mean, even if you discount the lava, it's some violent earthquakes, landslides, that sort of thing. It's just a very, very dangerous place to be right now. One point that a lot of my Icelandic viewers have made is that people always have this idyllic, view of what Iceland is like. Oh, it's such a gorgeous place, for tourists to come to. Oh, it's so beautiful. The people here are so friendly, et cetera, et cetera. And they don't really appreciate what it's actually like in Iceland if you've never lived there. Living in that country's got some serious drawbacks, and this is definitely one of them. I had an opportunity to speak to a lady who was quite safe during a volcanic eruption, but she lived close to it. She said she didn't get a decent night's sleep for weeks because that volcano was just roaring all damn night. I mean, that's just a frightening sound, and you have no idea You don't know if, all of a sudden an unexpected channel of lava is just going to come rolling through your town and you're going to have to evacuate, assuming you can get out in time. Scary stuff. So, not necessarily the most ideal place to live, but at the same time, a place of just amazing beauty and the most fantastic people in the world, let me tell you. Icelandic people are just awesome. So helpful, so nice, so intelligent. I mean, they're just great people overall. So anyway, okay, that's enough talking about Iceland. Let's talk about Starship. I have some updates for you from the FAA. Unfortunately, these are updates in regards to what hasn't happened rather than what has happened. Instead of giving you my take on what they said, I am just going to go ahead and tell you what the communication was. My email to the head of public affairs for the FAA is read as the following: Can the FAA comment as to whether you've received a mishap report from SpaceX yet? If not, do you know what sort of progress SpaceX has made with their investigation? And finally, is it safe to say that SpaceX will not be allowed to launch again before the identified issues are rectified? So this was the response that I got. Jordan, please contact SpaceX for the status of its mishap investigation and the timing of when it will submit its final investigation report to the FAA for our review and approval. Okay, even though they told me to go to SpaceX for details, the fact that they worded it that way demonstrates that the FAA has not yet received its mishap report from SpaceX. If SpaceX knows what went wrong with the launch, they have not yet sent a mishap report to the FAA. However, it is possible that SpaceX has identified the cause of the mishap or the anomaly, and they just don't have a plan to fix it yet. They need to put together a plan as to how they're going to rectify the issue before they launch again. Because what the FAA is going to want is a clear plan as to, okay, you know what went wrong. Now, what do we do about rectifying it? Okay. So we've got that. Now let's go ahead and go through the process now. This is how the FAA will handle this once SpaceX submits their report. A return to flight of the SpaceX Starship Super Heavy vehicle requires: Number one, SpaceX must submit a final Starship OFT2 mishap investigation report to the FAA with identified corrective actions. Okay, so they have to tell the FAA what went wrong, and then they have to tell them what they're going to do to try to prevent it from happening again. Number two, the FAA must approve and close out the SpaceX mishap investigation. Number three, SpaceX must submit a license modification application that incorporates the corrective actions identified during the mishap investigation. Number four, the FAA must approve the license modification request. The mishap investigation and the license modification process are happening concurrently. So the FAA is trying to do this as efficiently as possible, but as we can see, the mishap investigation is not complete. And so, we're not going to be doing a launch until then. So let's go ahead and do a quick review. And this may be a bit boring to some of you, but again, I want this channel to be informative and educational, right? I want you guys to know what all goes into this. I mean, why does it take the FAA so long to get this kind of stuff done? What and why? Why does this have to be done? Is it just for the sake of red tape, or is there a rationality behind it? So, how does the FAA enforce and monitor commercial space transportation? Okay, pre-operational activities, and again, all of this is associated to safety. That is the FAA's main concern. That's the reason they exist. is for aviation and now space flight to be conducted as safely as possible. You have pre-operational activities. So you have qualification, installation, testing of flight safety components. All of this is generally done. Mission readiness reviews, safety compliance and support reviews, working groups, planning discussions, operations, rehearsals, etc. Then you have operational activities that the FAA handles, which includes monitoring countdown procedures, operator communication processes, procedural execution, vehicle processing and preparation, safety critical operator launch site personnel interaction, and finally identifying non-nominal or public safety issues. That's for operational activities. And then post-operational activities include monitoring of post-operational reviews, including, of course, reports like mishap reports, post-flight reentry evaluations, lessons learned discussions. So in other words, this is why we lost the rocket. This is why we lost the booster. This is why we lost the orbiter. And, this is what we learned from that. And communicating and coordinating with operators to correct non-compliance issues. Now, of course, I don't think non-compliance is an issue that SpaceX actually has. At least not recently. They've been working very closely together with the FAA to make sure that these things are done properly. By the way, Scott, thank you so much for the $5 Canadian. Really do appreciate that. And just to be clear, like I say, I really appreciate all the support I've been getting, because Vulcan Centaur, even though it didn't happen on Christmas Eve, I am going to cover that particular launch. And also I have an invitation, not 100% confirmed, but an invitation from Sierra Space to go see Dream Chaser and Shooting Star in Ohio. It's currently undergoing final testing at the Neil Armstrong testing facility in Sandusky, Ohio, which is about 50 miles or so outside of Cleveland. So very interesting indeed. The important thing for Reactor 3 is that the fish people don't need to be asked again. Yeah, I mean, that is a big thing. If we can have a flight without an anomaly, then there's no mishap report. That entire step gets skipped. And that's very important. If we can get to the point, we meaning SpaceX, we can get to the point to where, you have a launch without the loss of the vehicle, then no mishap, then no mishap report. That's super important. Michael, $5. Thank you so much. The talk of regulatory agencies are being more stringent on SpaceX and other Musk industries at POTUS Biden invitation. Michael, believe me, I think you have a lot of really good insights as to the things that happen in the spaceflight industry. However, I don't subscribe to that. And let me tell you why. The Fish and Wildlife, if Biden was actually trying to manipulate things behind the scenes, and by the way, I can't stand Biden. Just to be clear, I don't like the dude at all. So at least at how he's been running the country. So please don't misinterpret this as me being a Biden supporter or anything like that, because I don't support any candidate, any party in U.S. politics anymore. I've left that behind me. So, but if Biden were really trying to make an active effort to sabotage what's going on with Starship, the Fish and Wildlife Service should have kept their investigation going for the full 135 days or however long that they had to carry out the investigation. They should have pushed that all the way out to the furthest extent of what they could have legally done, and they would have been perfectly within their rights to do so. And we still wouldn't have a launch right now. We wouldn't have a launch until late January if the Fish and Wildlife Service had actually taken this to the extreme. As a matter of fact, because the Fish and Wildlife Service did provide their approval as quickly as they did, now environmental organizations are filing new lawsuits, new legal complaints against the FAA and the Fish and Wildlife Service. They are all arguing that the FWS gave the permission way too quickly, that they didn't investigate all the different impacts that Starship was having on the region. All they investigated was the Delta deluge system that should have been far more comprehensive than that. And it could have been. And if Biden had been behind the scenes pulling the strings, I assure you, it would have taken that long. The president of the United States has enormous influence over what these sorts of departments do. So I'm positive that if he really wanted to sabotage this, he could have done it. And it would have been a lot more difficult than it actually turned out to be. Once again, this is a personal opinion, but I just don't subscribe to the idea. I believe, by the way, that Biden's not terribly fond of Musk or anything, but I don't think that he's trying to sabotage him. And in so doing, by the way, also sabotaging the future of Artemis, because the more he screws over Starship, the more he screws over Artemis 3. Alan O'Donnell, thank you so much for the $5. Really do. Don't buy mince pies. Yes, I know that mince pies are not terribly good. I'm not a big fan. Thank you so much for the $5. Thank you so much for the $10. Would love to see me at Sandusky. Yes, indeed. I would love to be there. I just drove through Detroit not that long ago. Thanks so much for those super chats, guys. Guys are awesome. As I say, makes a big difference to this channel and my ability to bring you the kind of coverage that I do. Titus, again, to answer your question, the FAA has not given their permission for the third flight because they have not received a mishap report from SpaceX yet. The FAA has not had an opportunity to approve the flight because SpaceX is still not finished with their investigation. And you know, this is something we need to keep in mind. And also, a lot of you may be aware of the talk that was given by Kathy Lueders in Brownsville. Just to give you some rundowns on that. She discussed the details of the two flights that actually did happen, future plans for Starbase. Kathy Lueders, very clear that Boca Chica is going to be the primary launch facility for SpaceX. Now, I don't know if I'm telling you, I continue to not agree with that because there is so much opposition to what's happening there. It's so much of so many, hurdles to jump, so much red tape, so many legal actions being taken that cannot be taken at Cape Canaveral. It's a lot easier to launch out of the Cape than it is to launch out of here. And even currently, under current FAA approvals, they're not even supposed to be launching any more than 5 times a year. I think it's going to be difficult to get this facility up to a rapid cadence of launches without stirring up a whole lot of shit with the locals, because you are closing down the highway all the time. You're closing the public beach all the time. That's really going to be very disruptive. And I think it's going to make a lot of people angry. Now, I think that Boca Chica should definitely be an important facility for SpaceX. I just don't know if it's going to be their primary preeminent launch facility for Starship. John says 1.5 years is, oh, no doubt. Thank you, John. I appreciate your comment. Again, a personal opinion. I mean, for all I know, 5 years from now, Starbase may be launching a Starship every week or, twice a week. Who knows? It's one thing I've learned about SpaceX is never underestimate it. A question just came in from a producer saying that if they're launching twice a week, could Boca Chica Beach be public? No, it couldn't. The amount of times that they would have to close that highway and close the beach down to take the booster out, fuel the booster, to do everything they need to do in order to launch a rocket, they'd have to close that highway and that beach down continuously. And honestly, I think the only way you're going to be able to do that is for the government to sell the beach and that road to SpaceX. Just no longer make it public. And that is a complicated thing to do legally. And there's going to be a lot of people in that region that are going to be vehemently opposed to it. So, it's an open question. And that's, again, why I think it's going to be tough for Starbase to become the primary launch facility for SpaceX. Norman Moray, thank you so much for joining on with the Angry Advocates. Once again, you're going to be getting an invitation, for a Discord invitation. As a matter of fact, it's already sitting there in your inbox, in your community inbox on YouTube, where you'll be able to join the Discord server and join the conversation. Hello, Mark, watching from Ireland. Very fond of Ireland. Just, I've been there a couple of times recently. They've got a lot of neat stuff happening there. Chris, thank you for the tenor. Really do appreciate you always contributing to the channel all the time. Really do appreciate that. Makes a massive difference to me. So in any event, that's one thing that she had to say. Once again, I'm going to believe it when I see it. I think it's going to be a very difficult thing indeed to accomplish. To accomplish, constant launches from Boca Chica. Okay, so I'm just going to get some of the quotes that Kathy made. This next year is going to be really, really critical for us to continue our test out and being able to kind of move Starship to its next level of being able to accomplish its mission. I would agree with that. Along with us looking at the reuse of the booster, very important, and being able to perform landing operations. Our goal is to be able to bring the big booster back and to be able to use it and turn it around and launch again. Obviously, Starship is not going to work, at least not for Artemis, unless they're able to do that. The paltry amount of money that NASA gave to SpaceX is not going to be enough to cover the cost of all those launches of Starship if they can't reuse the booster. They're going to be going back to NASA with hat in hand for more money if they can't reuse the rocket. Reusability is absolutely vital in order for this transportation system to be our solution for going to the moon, Mars, and elsewhere. Okay, let's see. What other comments do we have? She's talking about it being a game changer, which obviously it is if they can achieve reusability. Absolutely. Also talked a bit about the Massey test facility. But here, the key thing that was conveyed during this particular talk is the fact that she said that, at least at that time, but this is about a week ago now, or close to a week ago, as of that point, SpaceX had still not identified what caused the destruction of the booster and the orbiter, especially the triggering of the flight termination system. That had not yet been assessed as to why it detonated when it did. So, there's, at least at the time of her talk, there's still a fair amount of investigation that needs to be done. Now, who knows? A lot of that may be completed at this point. However, as I said at the beginning of this live stream, as of right now, the FAA has still not received a mishap report from SpaceX. So again, for anybody who's thinking, well, we're just waiting on the FAA to approve this, no, we're not. And that was the case before too, by the way. We went weeks and weeks and weeks thinking that it was the FAA holding up the process. It really wasn't. It took about 5 months before SpaceX actually submitted their mishap report to the FAA, before that was actually even sent to them. The FAA was not in a position to approve anything until they get a mishap report. So, we would assume, let's hope, that SpaceX has figured out what caused the booster and the orbiter to be lost. Then they need to come up with a game plan. They need to implement that game plan to get the booster and orbiter into a condition to where they're much more likely to be successful the next time around. Then they need to submit that to the FAA. FAA needs to review it and approve it. All these things take time. And once again, that is why, shortly after Elon Musk said that, we would be returning to flight by late December or something, I said, the only way that's going to happen is if you want to see the rocket blow up again. Which just, these things don't happen that quickly. They will happen quickly once the rocket is up and running and reliable. Thank you so much for the $20, Andrew. How many more OFT launches is Starship going to require before they don't experience erectile dysfunction. That's great. I love it. Yeah, that's a very good question. It really depends on how you define that, because they may make it to orbit, but even if they do, they're not going to get the booster back to be reused. Even on the occasions when they do successfully go to orbit, the first time they do make it, the booster will not be recovered. And we'll see how gentle, if it can land on the ocean very gently, then we know that there's a good chance that it can be reused and recovered. So those are all important details that are going to come out of OFT3. But once you reach orbit, then you need to try to get the booster back, and that's going to be the big challenge, I think, for a lot of 2024, is reusing that booster. And also, as you're reusing the booster, we also need to start getting the orbital refueling. That needs to start going through the process. Fortunately, it was announced recently that SpaceX might start testing out some of the orbital refueling systems, some of the orbital refueling hardware. Now, how do you do that on a suborbital mission that only lasts 45 minutes or something? How do you accomplish any testing of a orbital refueling system? My opinion, maybe they have a couple of tanks in the fairing, with a pump or something, and they try to test out pumping propellant or pumping liquid of some kind back and forth between those tanks while the rocket is in microgravity. That might be one way of doing it. Have some sort of test payload in the fairing, or maybe associated with the header tanks, something along those lines, and then experiment with tank-to-tank transfer of fluids. That isn't, of course, the same as docking a tanker Starship with a fuel depot in orbit and then transferring propellant and oxidizer that way. That's going to be a lot more complicated. But nevertheless, these things are going to take, it's going to take time, and it's one step at a time, obviously, one thing at a time. And I know we would all love to see Starship become operational, for Lunar Starship to be flying its way towards the moon, for the Dear Moon mission to be carrying people, including Tim Dodd, in an orbit around the moon, for history to be made over and over again by this incredible rocket. But we also, I really try to be the channel that stays realistic at the same time, to set realistic expectations. And a lot of people interpret that as me being anti-SpaceX. Far from it. I want SpaceX to be successful. I want Starship to revolutionize spaceflight. But at the same time, we've got to be realistic as to how long this is actually going to take. And as of right now, the next step, the next stage that SpaceX needs to be laser focused on is OFT3. And in order to get to OFT3, they need to analyze what happened, obviously, with the booster and orbiter. We're not sure if they're even at that point yet. Once they've identified it, how do you fix it? How do you take an existing rocket, because we have existing boosters and orbiters ready to go, how do you take something that's already been built and modify it with these corrective actions? That'll be kind of challenging. Get that done, and then submit it to the FAA. The FAA reviews it, approves it, sends it back, and then they can launch. None of those things are going to happen overnight. None of those things are even going to happen probably in early January, maybe late January. I would say more probably sometime in February, but sometime very soon indeed. Keith McKnight, how would a lunar toilet work on Starship in low G? Good question. Thank you so much for the $2, by the way. I don't even know if they've considered, a lunar toilet. I mean, if you have any gravity at all, then a lot of the principles in the operation of anything should be fairly similar. But at the same time, you got to be super careful about things like that, because any toilet, any sort of sewage facility is going to have, dangerous bacteria associated with it. So any solution that they come up with absolutely has to have the health and safety of the astronauts really thoroughly examined. To give you some examples on how that's different, the IHAB module for the Lunar Gateway has the toilet in the ceiling of the space station module. Obviously, you can't do that where you have gravity. Even on the moon with 1/6 gravity, you can't do that. So any sorts of lunar bases are going to be fundamentally different from anything that you put into orbit. But to be or to not to be tattooed, well, I'll tell you, if Vulcan Centaur takes off as planned, January 8th or 9th or something, I have a feeling there'll be no tattoo. Then again, if there's another delay, then yeah, we're still going to have a hell of a race on our hands. And if you think that I'm just being casual about this and don't really care, oh yeah, I definitely care. I mean, I want to see Starship fly as soon as possible, but I want Vulcan to go first, damn it. For purely selfish reasons. So in any event, guys, that is our current update on the circumstances. Just again, to give you an encapsulated version of what's been said. And this is per the FAA, by the way. Just got an email from them less than 24 hours ago. No mishap report from SpaceX yet. Without a mishap report, it means that the FAA has nothing to review and nothing to approve. SpaceX still has work to do before that mishap report is going to be submitted. Once it's submitted, the FAA needs to review it, give corrective actions. SpaceX needs to carry out those corrective actions. Then we'll have another launch. When is that likely to happen? I don't think in the end of January at the earliest. More probably sometime in February, maybe even March. It really depends on what happens. The key thing, the most important thing, is that this next flight test is successful, not that it happens really, really fast. Michael, thank you so much for the $10 real quick. Really, several fluid engineers, including Zach G, by the way, fantastic work that guy does, are working on a video rendering of internal tank events post-hot staging to determine the process to failure. I'll tell you, those guys do incredible work. Incredible work. And by the way, I consult with a lot of what they do on a regular basis to develop a lot of my own opinions. So really appreciate your help there at the last second there, Michael. Appreciate everybody's attention. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And until OFT3 actually happens, until Starship actually flies and carries out a successful orbit of the Earth, and we have reusability as well, until those milestones are achieved, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.